Hey there, TouchDesigner developers. Jack DiLaura here with the Interactive and Immersive HQ. In this video, we're going to build a little generative effect inspired by the work of Lillian F. Schwartz. We'll dive into her bio a bit when we start building our project, but suffice to say that she is one of the pioneers of computer-based art and definitely one of the first to really forefront the use of the computer and computer-based graphics as her main kind of artistic endeavor. So we're going to work on creating generative control channels for things like the position of the shape as well as the color, as well as working with texture-based effects like feedback and a number of other operators to create the visual component of this effect. So it's a lot of fun to put together. Stick around and we're going to jump right into it. So one of the best places to learn a little bit more about Lillian F. Schwartz is her website, which is Lillian with 2 L's.com. So one thing I wanted to mention before you go and take a look at this page is that as a trigger warning for any of us out there who have sensitivity to flashing imagery or lights or things like that, a lot of these early computer videos that she was working on do have a flashing component to them, which I could see triggering that sort of response. So definitely proceed with caution on this page. But with that aside, she's got a wide variety of her work available here, including her films that she made with a variety of different computers over the years, as well as work in a ton of different mediums. She's a very accomplished artist who didn't start out working with computers, but actually started with physical media and sculpture, and then eventually made her way into the new frontiers of digital and computer art in the 60s. She was a part of some of the early experimental groups at the time, like E.A.T, E.A.T, which was experiments with art and technology, which saw artists and engineers collaborating. Besides that, she also worked at Bell Labs, which was at the kind of forefront of experimentation with the computer at the time. And as we can see in her bio, has collaborated with numerous computer musicians throughout the years, exhibited at a huge variety of different institutions, and obviously has a very interesting and groundbreaking career path in this field of digital arts. So anyway, that's a little bit of a background about Lillian. We're going to, for this project, take a look at a particular film on the films page here, which is from 1975 and is called Kinesis. This is where the inspiration for this aesthetic, this video effect that we're building today comes from. And as you can see, is a variety of different shapes that move around on the screen and then sort of fill up the screen with a somewhat feedback-like effect. So again, we're not going to be trying to do a one-to-one recreation of this particular effect. We're kind of taking it as our inspiration in terms of the core concept, and then working with the tools we have in TouchDesigner to build something, kind of in a similar vein. So before you dive back into TouchDesigner, I would just recommend that you take a look at Lillian F. Schwartz's website to, get a sense for her work in the field of computer art, as well as in all of these other mediums that she's worked in over the years, and hopefully to get some additional inspiration for experimenting with this effect and others in TouchDesigner. All right, so we're going to be starting off with a blank network and adding in to start the rectangle top. So the rectangle top is going to provide us with the core shape that we're moving around for the effect. And of course, you're welcome to use something else like a circle top, or even maybe getting into 3D rendering for some additional types of geometry. But again, kind of to emulate and simulate the content that Lillian Schwartz made, I'm going to be working with a rectangle to start. For the parameters for this operator, I'm going to first come to the common page and set the resolution to 1024 by 1024. I'm just going to go with the square resolution because that's what I had at the intro, but of course, feel free to experiment. I'm also going to set the pixel format here to 16-bit fixed. I want the higher bit depth here because I want to make sure that we can, in our feedback loop, fade out to full transparency without any kind of artifacting, but I don't need the full bit depth of 32-bit and or the range beyond the 0 to 1 fixed range. So that page is now complete. Let's come on over to our rectangle page where I'm going to set the size here a little bit differently. I'm going to set the height to 0.4 so that we now have more of a rectangular shape instead of a square. And then I'm going to come down to the anti-alias switch and turn that off. Now, one of the things that I had going on in this effect was to slightly shift the color of this square or this rectangle now over time. And we're going to go ahead and add that in now just so that we can have that kind of instantiated before we get into the feedback portion of the effect. And the way that I approach this is maybe a little bit different than we usually would for dealing with colors. And I just did this to give myself basically a simple way of creating cycling through hues rather than maybe randomly generating colors. So what I did for this particular effect was to add a constant top to the network. I set the resolution to 1 by 1, so we've just got a single pixel here. I set the color to red, so that means 1 in the red channel, 0 in the green, 0 in the blue. Then I attached this to an HSV adjust top, which allows us using this hue offset slider to cycle through these different hue values that are available to us. And I used for this a simple expression to allow this to slowly kind of cycle through all of the available hues over time. So what I'm going to do here is drag this parameter window out a little bit. I added an expression here for the hue offset, which is ABS time, capital T, dot seconds, times 5, and this whole part of the expression is in parentheses. And then I used a modulo operator here, and then 360, so that whenever our seconds value here passes this 360 mark, it's going to loop back to 0, which we should see happen in just a second. So you saw there, it hit the maximum and then went back to 0 and now is going to count up again. So of course you could do this with chops or something like that, but this is a pretty easy way of getting that cycling value that we need. So then I added a null after that, and this is going to serve as the color that we'll be using for the rectangle over here. So then I, just to make things simple, I used a top to chop to convert this single pixel of color into chop channels, which then I can route to the rectangle top color parameters itself. Now here, we're not actually really going to need the alpha channel, so I'm just going to remove that from our set of channels. And now that we've got those all set up, I'm going to add a null at the end, just in case maybe we want to, I don't know, add some filtering to smooth out the change for this color later on, or just give ourselves the opportunity to experiment. And this is going to be called null space color. I'm then going to go ahead and make chop references from each of these 3 channels to the fill color parameter over here on the right. So start off with the red channel, which I'll drag over to fill color R and make a reference. Then we'll click and drag from the G channel and then let go over here on the second parameter, make a chop reference, and then finally grab the blue channel and do the same thing. And now we've attached all those channels to our fill color over here on the right. And again, what this is going to do is, because this is a smoothly increasing hue offset value, we're basically going to cycle through all of the hues in a smooth and somewhat slow, but enough sort of movement to see the change happen over time. But of course, you could set this up with any number of control channels to make this animation, not be smooth and maybe have a little bit more, random or instantaneous change to it. So the next thing that I did was to add some additional processing to this rectangle to give it a kind of beveled pseudo 3D effect. And I approached that via the emboss top. So when you first plug in, let's say the rectangle in this case, to the emboss top, you can see that it creates a sort of an outline. You can't really see the top or the bottom, but we've got some stuff happening on the left and the right. And by manipulating the parameters of this operator, we can really kind of emphasize the edges of the shape and create this sort of pseudo beveling effect. So what I'm going to do here is to start off, I'm going to set the select option up here to alpha so that it's going to use the alpha channel, or look at the alpha channel for creating the embossing effect. I'm going to leave the midpoint at 0.5. I'm going to set the, actually, let's come down to the direction first so we can see this happen. I'm going to set the direction to 75. That would be 75 degrees. And now you can see we have a nice outline for our shape, although it's kind of a thin outline at the moment. So we're going to work with the parameters above that to increase the width of that outline. I'm going to set my sample step here up to 20. And so I'll use the value ladder here to do that. And then you'll see now that it's become very, very dim. That's because our strength is set too low. So if I set the strength to 50, now we've got some nice values for each one of the sides of our rectangle, all of which are different from one another, which is cool. So, it doesn't really look so much like a bevel at the moment, but we can use compositing and a little bit of blur to make that change. So I'm going to add my composite top into the mix, and I'm going to connect the rectangle and the emboss to that. You'll see with the default multiply mode, we have something that maybe is looking like it's got a little bit of dimension to it, but we can continue on by adding in a blur to emphasize this even more. So I've attached a blur after the composite, and in the blur, I'm going to set my pre-shrink to 5. And you'll see by doing that, when we're up close, like so, it kind of looks, well, somewhat dimensional, but maybe a little bit blurry, as you might expect. But once we start to pull away from it a little bit, what started off as this kind of sharp delineation between these different sides is starting to blend together into a kind of 3D appearing shape. So that is our kind of final step for this portion of our effect. And now what we're going to do is to add in 2 additional operators before we get into our feedback loop. So before we take this shape into the feedback, we need to have the ability to adjust the overall level brightness of the output here, because sometimes, as we might see, because we're using this multiply blend mode, the colors can end up being a little bit dark, and thus our final effect looks a little dark as well. So I like to add in a level after the blur. And here we'll have the option to set the brightness up. I'm going to increase this to 1.25 just to keep things the same as they were for the intro. And we can always come back and adjust that later. And then, importantly, we're going to be using a transform top after the level top to both scale and reposition this shape. And this is really one of the core pieces of this effect. The ability to translate this via some custom chop channels that we create is really what gives the kind of look, emulating the artwork of Lillian F. Schwartz. And we're going to use the scale parameter here as well, just to give ourselves a much smaller rectangular shape. So I'm going to start by setting the scale to 0.2. So we've got much smaller rectangle there at the center. And then we're going to come back to these translate parameters because we need to set up a chop network first in order to provide us with those controls. So for the chop network, I actually approached this in a somewhat similar way to what we have going on over here, providing the color for our rectangle. That is to say, I started with a series of tops and then converted that into chop channels to provide control. So in this case, I'm going to be adding in a noise top. And in the noise top, I'm going to be making a variety of different changes. First of all, I'm going to come to the common page. I'm going to set the resolution again to 1 by 1. I'm going to set the pixel format here to 32-bit float because in this case, I actually do want to have a nice large amount of values available to me in this. And I also want to be able to generate values outside of the 0 to 1 range. So I've done that. I'm going to go ahead and come back to the noise page. I'm going to use the Simplex 4D noise option here. It doesn't really matter. That's what I used for the effect that we had at the beginning of the video. They'll all give you slightly different results. Feel free to experiment. This is, again, just the type of noise that we're using to generate these random values. I'm going to turn the monochrome switch off because I do want this to be colorful. And then from the top, I'm going to set the seed to 8,134. Then I'm going to come to the period. I'll set that to 5. I'm going to set the harmonics to 0.9. We're going to leave the amplitude at 0.5. Oh, that was my mistake. Actually, we want the harmonics at 2. It is the harmonic gain that I ended up setting to 0.9. Okay, cool. So that means everything looks pretty good there. Next up, we're going to come to the transform page and set our translate Z parameter. So I'm going to enter in an expression here, once again, using the ABS time.seconds expression, and then I'm going to multiply that by 0.1. That's going to allow our color now to shift over time. Then, like before, I'm going to add in an HSV adjust to hue cycle the color being output by our noise. And in this case, the noise is providing a constantly changing color value, but the idea is just to kind of add in even an additional level of randomness to the mix. So what I'm going to do actually is to copy the HSV adjust operator from before by clicking on it and then hitting Control C. And then I'll paste that and connect that to my noise instead of to the constant below. Now, in this case, I'm going to change my expression here. And instead of multiplying ABS time.seconds by 5, I'm just going to leave this at ABS time.seconds. All right. Then I will add in a math chop to adjust the range of values that we are outputting from this operator. So with the math operator, I'm going to come to the mult add page, pre-add negative 0.5. And what we'll see when we add a null at the end here, and this is going to be our null position text for position texture. I'm going to right click on the output of that and add in a top to chop, again, to convert this to color channels. We'll see here that by using this math chop, or math top rather, and subtracting 0.5, we're now outputting color values in the range of negative 0.5 to positive 0.5. We're going to use the red and green channels in this case to provide us with X and Y position channels for our rectangle. That'll happen actually over here in the transform top. So what I'm going to do is to change things up a bit in my top 2 chop. I'm going to call the red channel X. I'm going to call the green channel Y. And then I'm going to get rid of the blue and the alpha channels because we don't need them for this particular effect. Then what I'm going to do is to add a speed chop into the mix. So the speed chop is going to allow me to take these chop channels, use that as speed values essentially, and convert that to units of distance over time. What I'm going to do here with the speed chop is to set the limit type to loop, and then I'm going to set my minimum to -0.5 and my maximum to +0.5. What'll happen here is that anytime that we are incrementing or decrementing our values in the X or the Y direction, and it hits one of those limits, it's going to loop around and cause our little shape here to sort of go off of the screen and then pop back onto the screen on the other side. And that way we get a little bit more variety with our movement pattern. We're not sort of having the shape always just sort of sitting within the square boundaries of the texture itself. After that, I'm going to add in a limit chop, and this is going to provide us with a little bit of steppiness to our shifting in values. So I'm going to use this on the quantize page. I'm going to set the quantize value to round. I'm going to set the value step to 0.05, and you'll see that that is quantized the changes in value that we are generating over here, and in the end is going to give us a little bit more of a early computer style movement pattern. So I'm going to add a null to the end. We're going to call this one null position. And we can then hook up the X and the Y values here via chop reference to the translate X and Y values over on the transform top. So make sure that you first have selected the transform. Then I'm going to make a chop reference from the X channel and the Y channel. And we'll see that we now have some random movement, which also has a little bit of that steppiness of those early computer graphics that Lillian Schwartz was working on. So again, feel free to jump back at any point during this process and experiment with the noise or any of the additional operators beyond that as well to change, modify the movement pattern that we are currently generating. Now we're going to move on to our feedback effect. And this is really where things start to get interesting. So we're going to add a null. This is our final pre-feedback operator. And let's go ahead and then add in the feedback top. So for the feedback, what we're going to do is to, first of all, add a null and just go ahead and set up this feedback loop in the first place. So I'm going to finish our feedback loop at the moment with a composite. And I actually want to connect this null number 2 to the composite first, and then connect our second null up top second, meaning essentially I want in the order of connections here for the operator pre-feedback to be layered on top of the null at the end of our connected directly to our feedback top. I'm then going to set the composite mode here to over, and then we're going to go ahead and add in some additional operators. Well, first of all, actually, to make our feedback loop start generating feedback, I'm going to drag the composite top onto the feedback top. Immediately, we'll see we have some layering going on in it. It's looking pretty cool. It's already really giving us something pretty similar to what we had at the beginning of the video. Although you'll notice here that, the color is shifting, but we're not really getting a sense of decay over time, as in everything is just sort of being stacked on top of one another and then never really disappearing from the screen. So to add that into the mix, we can insert an operator between this feedback and null 3. called the level top. Oops, I think I must have put that in the wrong place, or I don't know, maybe that was a glitch. What's supposed to happen is that was supposed to be connected to the feedback and then to null 3. Well, hopefully that worked on your end. Either way, we just want the level 2 to come between the null and the feedback 1. On the post page, I'm going to set a very, very slight adjustment to our opacity parameter, which is to set this to 0.999. That's going to cause a very, very subtle shift in opacity over time. We can already see it starting to happen here, where we can see the kind of checkerboard appearing through the areas on the screen that have been sitting around the longest in our feedback loop. Another thing that is kind of fun to add into the mix here is another HSV adjust. So I'm going to add that prior to the level top. I'm going to set the hue offset here to 0.15. And then even though our the color of our rectangle is shifting, we're now also going to have a slight color shifting being applied to the feedback that's already on the screen as well. So we're going to get this kind of double shifting effect. And that added together with the opacity shift really gives us this nice kind of dimensional layered effect going on. So now that we've got our project complete, all that is left is for you to continue experimenting with the structure that we've got already. So with that, we've completed this particular effect. And my recommendation moving forward is that you continue playing around with the structure that we've got set up here. Whether it's plugging in different shapes into this feedback loop that we've got set up, working with maybe different ways of moving those shapes around on screen, or even working with the feedback loop itself to really kind of push the generative possibilities that are available there. There's definitely a lot that you can do to move forward and create alternate variations of this project. So with that, I hope you have enjoyed putting this one together. Definitely take a look at Lillian F. Schwartz's work in more detail on your own time. And with that, we're going to close this video out. Thanks so much for watching. Looking forward to seeing you in the next video.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. If you like our YouTube content, I highly recommend you check out the Interactive and Immersive HQ Pro. The HQ Pro is the only comprehensive educational resource and community for immersive design, TouchDesigner, and creative tech pros. In the HQ Pro trainings, we cover almost any topic you can think of, and we go way more in depth than we do in our YouTube tutorials. We have a private group where Matthew Reagan, myself, and our other industry veteran and pioneer teachers answer your questions every single day. If that sounds cool, click the link in the description to learn more. And if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe for more free TouchDesigner and immersive content.